Welcome to the Coach's Table Podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What's going on, everybody? Oh, man, it is the fall here, and the fall weather, I don't know about y'all, but I love it. You know, the morning time where it's a little cool and you got sweatshirt, sweatpants, and then the afternoon it's like cool, like t-shirt, shorts. You're rocking. This is the best time. The leaves are starting to change. The color is starting to pop. It's getting to be beautiful outside. My favorite time right now. This is just me. Some people don't like it. Some people, today I saw somebody had on a straight winter coat. Dead ass. I'm not even kidding you. I'm in the South, okay? And I don't think it went below 55 today. And they had a winter coat on inside. I'm like, what are you doing, man? But hey guys, for today's episode, hey, before I introduce the guest, which I'm excited to have, because we've been having a great conversation off air, do us a huge favor, okay? Share the show. If you guys get anything from this, if you get entertained, if you get educated, if you say, you know what, that's a great point, I agree with that, or if we challenge a thought process for you, or if we give you something that you're like, hey, let me implement that because this is applicable stuff, do us a huge favor, share the show, okay? If you're on Spotify, it takes just a couple of seconds to do that. It takes 2 seconds to leave a review as well. The review is the most important thing, and here's why. It tells other coaches, other athletes, other people, hey, this is worth their time of listening to. So if you guys think this is worth their time of listening to, do us a huge favor, leave a review. A 5-star would be fantastic. And then we drop the full-length episodes on YouTube. So go check that out. Hit the subscribe as well. Would be much, much appreciated. So without further ado, I have a fantastic S&C coach, recently married. He's been at the pro level. He's been at the G League level. He's been at the college level. And it's been a great conversation. Mr. Alex Koss, what's up, man?
Nothing much, man. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you spending the time. And sorry we got a little off track chatting for like 40 minutes before we even hit record on this bad boy.
I'll tell you what. Well, thank you for coming on. I'll tell you, it happens every time. I'm not going to lie to you because you get on, you start talking to people, and then I look at the clock. I'm like, yo, fuck. Like, hey, we should probably hit record. I want to be respectful. But it's just the way it happens, you know?
Dropping some gems in the pre-show, man.
Man, I always think I should just record it right away, but then it's always like, you know what, there's things that, we talk about off air that, myself and other people probably don't want to record it, and then you're like, yeah, but it was really good, and the conversation was great, and all that other stuff. So, but what's going on, man? Back in Philly, huh?
Back in Philly, yeah. All summer I was out in California. Like I said, got married. Was kind of doing my own thing out there, and ended up coming back. Been back here for a couple weeks. Been up with the Sixers. We've had some good time up there. A lot of guys back, and then we're starting our G League season in a couple weeks now here. So gonna be back in Wilmington and getting ready to roll. Season starts November 10th.
Wow, it's coming around. It's crazy how I think this is the best time of the year right now because it's like we have professional football going on, we have college football going on, got volleyball going on, which is electric for those of you that don't watch that, and then now it's like. Cool. Now we've got, college basketball starting up in literally like a month from today. And then we got NBA rolling and G League stuff. So it's like there's just a plethora of sports on constantly. High school too. Like I'm going to a high school game tonight. It's like that's exciting to watch. It's interesting to see. And so it's I think this is the best time from a sports fan, from a coaching, from a just in general standpoint. I'm like, man, you can't really beat this.
Oh, 100%. I just saw like a meme or a GIF or whatever of Braun walking around the locker room at the All-Star game, and he was like dapping everybody up, and it's like Monday Night Football, like Wednesday night MAC college game, like Thursday night football, Friday night football, Saturday college football, Sunday NFL, NBA preseason, like it's all starting up. It is best sports time. MLB playoffs starting too.
Like MLB playoffs,
that gets crazy. Yep.
Yeah.
Everything.
It's like even last night I was watching the Bears on Thursday Night Football, and it's like, they were 1-4, and you're like watching them, you're like, I don't know about the Bears this year. Who knows? And then it's like they pop off a 40-piece. It's like, where did this come from? It was an entertaining game. I'm like, what is going on? Like, so it's great though. But man, basketball. This episode is sponsored by TeamBuilder. TeamBuilder is the #1 performance platform for strength coaches around the world. Their software provides coaches with an elevated experience when it comes to program development, data tracking, and staying connected with athletes and clients. Coaches also have access to consultations with team builders in-house sports scientists to help manage and analyze data. Head to teambuilder.com and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. That is TeamBuilder, TeamBuildr.com, and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. Coaches, this podcast is sponsored by Samson Equipment. They have been providing elite strength training equipment and professional weight room solutions since 1976. If you value product quality, great customer service, and a company with integrity, make Samson Equipment your go-to. Visit them at samsonequipment.com and let them know the Coach's Table podcast gave you a seat at their table. That is Samson Equipment, SAMSON Equipment.com, and let them know the Coach's Table podcast gave you a seat at their table. So for those that don't know, I think it's, I'm always interested, and I think a lot of people too are, the differences between the pro and the college world, right? And so for a lot of us, we think the college world is pinnacle. It's, college basketball, college football, etc. But it's also really interesting to see how the pros kind of work and what that looks like from a performance standpoint, from a, development standpoint, because even though there's a lot of professionals out there, they still need a lot of development. What do you see, especially because of your time in the college sector, what are kind of the main differences amongst the two that really like stick out? Like, college is, you're grinding, you're working hard, all this stuff, and it's not that you're not in the pros, but like, what are you really kind of seeing as like two major differences or a couple major differences between the two?
Yeah, definitely. I would say one is like the college sector. It's a job, right? But you have so many other factors that are coming in with like school. It's like these kids are still a little young, so you don't know necessarily like who they are, what their personalities are. That they may be their first time at like a big school. So just meeting other people and kind of how they're starting to handle themselves, like what guys are actually there to like get better, what guys are there to just be kind of like picture players, like, hey, I'm on the team, like that's good enough for me. But then you also have a lot more like a lot more ownership, and you can be a little more militant over like your training style, right? Like they have to come lift, they have to do X, Y, and Z, they got to go to class, they have to go to study hall and kind of do all that stuff. So you can really develop the guys a lot more, I would say, just because you can have your hands on them, not only for the fact that like they have to do stuff, but like you might have guys for 4 years, and like the body can be changed so much from 17 to 21 or 18 to 22, right? Like you can really change these guys, and like you see it all the time on IG, like guys posting, hey, this was us in June, this is us in like October, now going into the season. And I mean, it's like no cap, like that's what you can do in an off season in college, because they have nothing better to do. Where in the pros, like you get pulled in so many different directions because of the money and all that stuff. I mean, now in NIL, like that could obviously be a factor in college.
Huge factor for sure.
NIL, but with the pros, I would say like, especially at the G League level, the motivation I think is at its peak, because it's like you're right at the cusp, right? Like you might be on a 2-year contract, or you might be on an Exhibit 10 where maybe you've been to some NBA training camps, but you've gotten cut at the last second and then signed to the G League roster. But you signed a 10-day, and those can get up to like 100 racks for 10 days. And it's like you were literally right there. Like you are almost at the pinnacle of your dream of playing at the NBA level. So a lot of these guys are like really tuned in, really focused. They want to work, and they don't have anything else to do. So like, I mean, even with us, like we're in Wilmington, Delaware. We're the Sixers G League affiliate, but to be honest, there's not that much to do out here aside from go to the gym and play basketball, right? So it's like and these guys really get after it. And I think that could also be a double-edged sword, because it could be the same way with like the college sector that we were talking about. Like some guys, it's like, oh yeah, I made it. Like it's like not really, dude. Like this is the G, and like it's kind of a running joke in G League. G stands for Gatorade. It's the Gatorade League. Used to be the NBA D League, Developmental League, but we call it the Grind League, because it's a grind. We fly commercial. We don't have the best equipment. We, like a lot of teams, share facilities with private trainers or minor league hockey teams as well. And so, it is glamorous at times when you see things like the showcase, right? Or you see things like NBA Summer League, which is generally a lot of G League guys or guys who are going to make NBA rosters, but they might play only 1 or 2 games. And don't get me wrong, like the perks being in the NBA are great. Like you get awesome gear, you get to do all these kind of stuff, but at the same time, it pushes these guys a little bit more to be like, man, like I've been in an NBA facility, like you get breakfast, lunch all the time, you get massage therapists, you got all these like toys, and then you get down here and it's like, yeah, we don't have that, dude.
Good luck.
You'll get a post-practice smoothie and you'll like it.
Yeah.
That's like,
there's some peanut butter and jelly in the bag. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would say that is probably the biggest difference, but you also see guys who just take this game so seriously, like being at the NBA level, and like guys who just want to get better. Like there are certain guys that you have to kick out of the gym, right? It's almost that Mamba mentality of like, there's, now that we can have all this data on you, we can say, dude, you need to like go rest and recover, because again, like this is their job, right? So in like the old adage in the NCAA, right? There's student athletes, student comes first. Right. But we all know that that's not necessarily how it works at all schools. I'm sure at some it does, but like a lot of schools like basketball and football bring in the most money, right? And so they're a student, but they are also an athlete, and they're bringing in a lot of money, and you're selling their jersey in the bookstore, and we kind of know.
And they have all online classes that they can do whenever they want to. Let's be real. Yeah.
Right. So like some of them are starting to get treated like pros, but it's like you have, I mean, the money that comes at the NBA level, you have guys who have physical therapists, like their own physical therapist, their own massage therapist, their own strength coach. So there are also a lot more, I guess, conflicting ideas. There has to be a lot better communication at the NBA level, because your health and performance staff might be 10, 12 people plus these other people who are coming in from the outside because it's somebody's personal guy. And so with that, having like a collaboration and not butting heads and being able to talk and like actually problem solve together, right? Where at the college level, it's kind of like, this is your team. You have full autonomy to basically do whatever you want. And as long as you're talking with like the PT that's assigned to your team or the AT that's assigned to your team, and you guys are all on the same level, then that is kosher, right? So that's kind of what the G League is like. We have, I'm the only strength coach. We have 1 PT and 1 AT. So we meet every day and we kind of just like go down the roster. But again, we have the time to do that because we're only with one team. Like at the college level, that's not necessarily how it works. Like you don't always have time to go over every single player. It's almost like when the issue is at hand, then you deal with it and then you kind of move from there. But I mean, I would say that like just seeing how much these guys treat it like a job and the motivation that they have to like want to get better or want to be the best, versus also kind of like the accountability standpoint where you don't, like, I can't make them do anything at the college level. Like you can basically make them come to the weight room. You can make them do essentially whatever you want. Like these guys can say, no, I'm not coming to practice today.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How do you, how do you guys kind of deal with that though? Because like, you know, it's the whole like kind of thought process, like you're a professional. So like you're going to show up to work, you know, whether you want to or not, because you show up to work on the days that you don't want to, and so do I, and, you know, like all that aspect. But it's really interesting because it's like, if you're on a 10-day, if you're on, you know, like a short lease per se, or you've been to the NBA, but now you're back on the G League, like I could see some of those guys be like, yeah, there's some money, but like I'm cooling it here, or whatever the case may be. That's really interesting to me because, like, for instance, in the college sector, you don't get to decide if you're coming to practice today or not. Like, you're going to practice, you know, like we can work with you, and it's there's so much more than that. And you know that, right? It's like, hey, let's work with this guy. And like, hey, what, like maybe we, you know, he takes some reps off, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But, that's really interesting. Like if you come to the weight room and you're not feeling the best, you know, like we can modify some stuff. Maybe we do more movement rather than lifting, and, you know, all that other stuff that's going on. But at a professional level, you know, I'm sure it's probably only a couple people, because I'm sure that the majority of them are like, I'm trying to get paid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And like, in college you can't, like, I would say the biggest issue is accountability when it comes to like just being on time, right? Like showing up late to practice, getting late out to the court, or maybe somebody is babying an injury, but you can't be like, hey, like go out there. They're like, no, I don't want to, because like they have agents, right? So like you have to deal with these different people that also are associated with this athlete. And it doesn't happen that much at the G League level, but at the same time, you also have like more people to report to, right? So at the G League, like we have a whole NBA staff that we have to report to. We have owners, we have GMs who expect these people to get developed. And as much as you don't want to say that there's a hierarchy of players on your roster, like there can be, because there's two-way contracts, there's exhibit 10s, there's guys who get put down on assignment, which is, I mean, obviously, like if they're down on assignment, then that's probably a priority for us because that's an NBA salary player. And so we need to make sure that they get all the attention that they want. But we also have to make sure that they're not coming down to just be like, oh, whatever, I'm down here. Like be pissed off that they're down in the GB and they're not flying private or like going on the California, like West Coast road trip, and like hold them accountable. Because if we don't, then they'll say, why aren't you doing this? And there's personalities, you know, there's attitudes, there's all this kind of stuff that factors into it. But it's kind of just making sure that you can connect with players, I would say. Like that's been the biggest thing. And it's a lot easier to connect, I think, at this level, just because you spend so much more time with them. Whereas at the college level, like you have a certain amount of time for a lift, or maybe you can't go to practice because you have another team, or you can't go on a certain road trip, or, you know, whereas here it's like we're with them whenever they're in the building, we're with them at the airport, you're with them at the hotel, like treatments, just all that kind of stuff. So building the relationship and like the trust with the athlete is paramount. And that kind of just helps with that whole process. Cause then you can say like, look, I'm not doing this for me. Like I want you to get paid too. Like I want you to get to the NBA. But if you're consistently late to practice, like no NBA team is going to say, hey, let's sign this guy as our 15th guy who always comes late to practice and is a head case. Like, nobody's going to want to give him money.
Yeah. You're like, yeah, sure. And you deserve to get paid how much because you show up late every day? Like it's like doing the minimum, you know, or not even the minimum. It's like just do the basics well, you know, it's just like.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what a lot of NBA teams are looking for too, right? Where like in college, you have guys who are like, maybe they're redshirting, or maybe they're like the 11th or 12th guy on the roster, but like there's probably a spot in that system that the coaches already know that they want them to develop into, like whether they're younger or like lower on the roster. So they kind of know what they're building up towards. Whereas here at the G League, it's like you could get picked up by any NBA team, right? Like, especially if you're on an E10, like two ways you can only go up to the NBA team. But you're also moving up to a team where you're going to be the last guy on the roster. Like, they're not going to ask you to score 30 points a game. Like, we have players that can do that. We want you to go up and play defense. We want you to go up and take charges, or like even be a cheerleader on the bench. Like, we want you to go up and swing the ball and like make the right cut and like do things like that. And I think that's really hard for guys, because when they're down here, they're like the guy, right? Like they are scoring 25, 30 points a game. Like they are like one of the
and people know they came from the NBA, and like they know like, oh, okay, like he can play. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And then they go up there and it's like a totally different role, I guess. Right. So it's like, know your role. Right. And in college, I just think that that's a little bit easier because you know the system, like you've been recruited, right? Like you kind of understand what the coach's vision for you is, as opposed to in the NBA. Trades happen. Right. Like you could get picked up by a completely different NBA organization and have no idea like what their schemes are at all, or how you would even fit into that. So just being able to play a role, knowing your role, and just being able to adapt. So it's like you have to make sure that these guys are ready to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You said a couple of things there. One I want to start with, and then I'll come back to the other point. So first is like working with guys that have their own like private trainers and their own strength coaches that they pay for. How does that, because at the college world, you kind of deal with it, but you don't, if that makes sense. Like you deal with it like when they go on a summer break, or they have an extended period off, maybe a Christmas break, and they go in and get 3 or 4 sessions in with, you know, a guy back home. It's like, okay, cool, like whatever, just don't hurt the guy and we'll be good. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it's always interesting, because it's just like, you don't know what we've been doing. You don't know what we plan on doing. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so if you go and get 3, 4, okay, not that big of a deal, totally fine, get some work in, great. But it's like if you're going home for a month or an extended period of time, it's like, well, I mean, that's a decent amount of time that we could be developing, and it's just like, then you're going to completely change or maybe do 180-degree opposite, which could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. You don't really know, but you kind of deal with it at the college level, but you kind of don't. It's now kind of very common practice, as you know, that the guys stick around all summer and they're with you all summer and you're training all summer and kind of in under your eye per se. But at your guys' level, with different individuals, different strength coaches, all that other stuff. How do you guys kind of manage that? I know communication is obviously a big thing, but is it like a collaborative effort? Is it like, well, that's your guy, you do what he wants, I suppose, or is it like you're inside of our organization, so you kind of abide by our guys' thought processes, or how does that kind of? I'm interested in that. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think that kind of depends organization to organization. Some
Sure.
let outside people in throughout the season,
Mm-hmm.
some don't. I think that also kind of depends on like player status, right, as well. So like
Uh,
who who is the guy? But what I would say is if a guy does go out during summer and he has his own guy during summer that he's not planning on bringing back, right? Like it's always really important to give them a call and say like, "Hey, what has he been doing all summer? Like, did you
yeah.
notice anything? Did he tweak anything?" So like, how can I kind of bridge your programming and thought process into my in-season training, right? Because like you don't want to get a guy back and just like disregard what he's been doing all summer and just start a completely new program. So
Right.
that's really important. Some guys
Right.
just have guys year round, right? Like they're in the facility, they're with them. You just don't. It's like that's just their guy. So you don't
Interesting.
even work with them in that sense unless they can't come in and then maybe they'll write you a program. Or you have guys who may come in and be out. And again, like it's just a constant communication, constant kind of teeter totter of let's make sure that this like let's just make sure the athlete comes first, right? Because at at this point it's not who's training him or who wants
Right.
to get credit for it. Let's
Mm-hmm.
make sure that the athlete is the main like point here and we want to make sure that they're not going to get hurt and we want to increase their performance, right? That's everybody's goal. We want to help this athlete get better. So just like it's a lot of communication. Whereas, like you said, in the college level, you may have 95% of your guys throughout the summer where one guy goes off and trains. So you only really have to talk to one guy. But at the NBA level, a lot of guys will train with the same trainer, but they might not all be from the same organization.
Sure.
Like one strength coach could have guys from 3 to 5 different organizations. So
Yeah.
it's always good to know that they've been training with other NBA athletes, right? So that helps. But also, they're not coming back to our organization. So I have to talk to this guy's guy. I got to talk to that guy's guy. I got to just make sure that I understand these
Yeah.
guys, like what they're all doing.
Yeah.
Because up here too, and for people who don't know, like most NBA teams carry 3 to 4 strength coaches.
Yep.
So um, each athlete will have one of the strength coaches, right? So like you will have 15 guys separated into each strength coach having maybe 4 to 5 guys. So you can
Sure.
highly individualize programming
Mm-hmm.
because they will get their own individual lifting session and training session. So
Right.
that's why, again, like communication is super important, and you need to make sure that you're you're individualizing what you need to individualize, but also when they're done with the season, hey, this is what like this guy needs to work on because you can't necessarily make a huge adaptation during an NBA season, right? It's almost like
Right.
a lot of it is maintenance because you have an 82 game season. In the G, we play 50 games. Like,
Yeah.
what's the best ability? It's availability, right? So let's make sure that our guys aren't getting hurt. Let's make sure that we are maintaining our strength and power metrics,
Yep.
whether we're looking at force text, whether we're looking at like an IMTP or a counter movement jump,
Mm-hmm.
or like the calf raise, like kind of whatever different organizations are looking at. And then you can say, hey, this is what this guy looks like he needs this summer. And again, it's just kind of like a constant back and
Yeah.
forth, just making sure that the athlete comes first.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important too. It's just like we're all trying to do this together to help this athlete be the best that they can be. And even though there's different thought processes, even though there's different programming styles, philosophies, all this great, cool, great. But I agree with you. Like, are they available to play, right? And are they seeing
Yep,
improvement, right? And improvement can
exactly.
be a multitude of things, right? But it's like, are they seeing improvement? Okay, if so, cool, right? Regardless of whether somebody wants to do whatever exercise, okay, cool, whatever, that's fine. Like, but let's just make sure they're able to play. Let's make sure that they can produce at a high level when required to, right? Which is the game, because the game
E-
is the number one metric. Like,
Exactly, right? Like, let's keep the main thing here.
facts. Yeah, yeah. And then the second thing I was interested in, because we kind of touched on it a little bit off there too, but like utilizing data, I think a lot of people now is like, okay, so if you don't have GPS and you don't have ForceDex, which kind of seem to be the best two, and then maybe VBT as well, but like if you don't really have those two, I feel like you're behind the eight ball. And then second of all, like you don't, there's so many coaches that don't know what to do with that information, or how to correlate things or anything from that standpoint. How do you guys kind of make sense of, maybe if you just want to pick one, let's do four stacks because that's interesting. How do you guys kind of make sense of the four stack data? Because first of all, it's a ton of data, and if you're jumping
Hmm.
consistently, right, it can get a lot it can get a lot of it can be a lot of data really fast. If you're doing an IMTP, if you're doing a counter movement jump, single leg jumps, hop test, drop jumps, like there's all these different things that are fantastic indicators. And then, inside each one of those, you have five, six, seven things that you're probably looking at, to be like, okay, like time to take off is important and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, well, this measures that, this measures that. How do you guys kind of go about your process of making sense of four stack data and having at least a rough outline or system to help you make decisions, improvements, or affect performance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I think a lot of coaches are eager to get their hands on data, but then
Mm-hmm.
it's also very easy to get paralysis by analysis, right? Like what is just noise and static, and like what is actually valuable data that you can use. So
Yeah.
first and foremost, meet as a staff, right? Based on what we know as professionals, based on what we've read in research or read in books or know from other people in our industry, what do we consider to be valuable information? And
Mm-hmm.
so that could be anywhere from, again, like a peak power on a CMJ, time to take off, uh, flight time. It could be landing asymmetry, takeoff asymmetry, right? So once you determine what variables you use, most important thing is baseline, right?
Yeah.
Like if you
Yep.
do not have a baseline on this athlete, then you have nothing to compare your data to. So you have no idea if they're getting better or not. And ideally, your baseline is going to come when the athlete is fresh or when you first get them so you understand where they're at. From there, now you can use it from, hey, like performance tracking. Let's take peak peak power, right?
Sure.
So you could use relative or you could use absolute. We
Mm-hmm.
like to use relative compared to body weight because weight fluctuates a lot throughout the season. And so
Mm-hmm.
this also just tells us a lot like, hey, like maybe this person is better at producing power when they're a little bit heavier and stronger, or actually when they're a little bit lighter. Like, what do they
Right.
like playing at? How
Mm-hmm.
do they produce power? And
Yeah.
so from here, you can use it from a performance tracking and you can also use it from an auto regulation standpoint. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of teams use the CMJ. It's a great test. Um, some teams will test as much as every day, right? Like auto
Yeah.
regulation. Some
Mm-hmm.
teams will test every 3 days, every 5 days, or 7 to 10 days. So now you can again like track longitudinally over the course of a season to see, okay, hey, we just went on this 7 day road trip. Guys come back. Everybody like you can and you know this with ForceX, right? Like you can
Yep.
track single players or you can track team output,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so
100%.
hey, like the entire team's output is down after the 7 day road trip, like maybe we should have a blackout day and just let these guys rest and recover. Which I mean is pretty intuitive, but it also could happen after just maybe like a random back to back in the middle of the season, right? Like it's about to be all-star break, like everybody's looking for the break, everybody wants a vacation. So there are times in the season when you kind of know that this stuff is going to happen, and then there's also random times where it's just good to have that data because if you don't, then you like it's all based on your eye test or
Yep.
you have to trust what your athlete's saying. And if everybody's saying that they're gassed and tired and our data backs that up, it's like, okay, now we can make informed decisions about
Right.
that. Another great tool for it is return to sport.
Yep.
right? So let's say an athlete gets injured. How do we know when he's ready to go back and play,
Yeah.
or she?
Yeah.
And so you can now say, hey, let's say, like an ankle sprain, like most common
Yep.
injury in basketball. Grade
Mhm.
1, grade 2, he's out for maybe like 3 to 5 days. Maybe he's out for 2 weeks. If it's a grade 2, we'll see.
Sure.
But now we can jump him and say, hey, okay, your numbers are starting to get back to normal. I think this is a good time to maybe ramp up his on-court stuff. Maybe this is a good time to return him to live. So like now you can have a whole communication as an entire health and performance staff
Yeah.
with his rehab, with his return to play, and now the player development coaches and the basketball coaches of this is a good time for us to try to get him back in, and these are the minutes that we're looking for. And lastly, and I think this is kind of an undervalued one with a lot of the science stuff, is like athlete buy-in. Some athletes love it. They love looking at their data. It drives competition when they can see it. And, like VBT is great for that as well. But also like jump heights. Like they now are watching each other jump and they're like, damn, you got up. Like, I'm going to try to beat that, right? And so you can use it for that. But also when it comes to a return to play aspect, it gives them confidence in their own body. Because they may say, I don't know, I'm not feeling great. And you can say, well, actually, like, look here, like this jump is basically back to baseline where you were, right?
Yeah.
And if we're looking at peak power, maybe we're looking at asymmetries, right? Because it was an ankle roll and we want to make sure that we're not favoring the other side going back. It's like, well, actually, you're under like 5%, right? Or whatever your organization sets as the red flag, 10, 15, 20% asymmetry. Hey, we're all confident that you can go back. I think looking at this data, I don't know how your body's feeling, and I trust that you know your body, but objectively, this is saying that this is probably a good time for us to start getting back to stuff. And they might be, yeah, actually, I do feel pretty good. And it can really alter their mindset in terms of, oh, well, if everybody's telling me this, then either everybody's wrong and I'm right, or maybe I'm the one that's wrong. And like,
exactly right.
people actually know what they're talking about.
It's crazy, huh? Yeah. That common trend. Yeah.
Right. And then so like that's kind of how we would use it throughout the course of a season, throughout a summer. And then this year, it's just something I was telling you a little bit about after reading Daniel Bove's book, Takeoff. I'm specifically interested in like CMJ archetypes, so jump strategies. So he basically outlines 5 to 6 different ones, whether it's a bimodal, there's 2 different bimodals, late peak, early peak, different plateaus, late peak, early peak, and then a unimodal jump, which are the most efficient jumpers. So essentially with this, we're not looking at landing at all. We're just looking at how they get down, break to get back up, right? And so the higher the peak in the front portion of that, either bimodal, unimodal, or plateau, generally denotes that they're better breakers. The higher the peak towards the end or the right side of that generally denotes that they're going to be more propulsive guys. So now, hey, let's see if we can bucket our guys based off of their jump strategies, but also how long may it take and how frequently do those jump strategies differ from each other? And do they differ throughout the course of a season, right? So like maybe as guys get tired, they start to shift from maybe a unimodal to a bimodal, and we can say, hey, like a lot of our guys are like bottoming out and maybe we should really focus on mobility because we've been traveling a lot, like guys' hips are getting tight. So maybe we need to focus more on like kind of motion and lotion stuff, some light loaded mobility, maybe like some fascia work, or maybe, hey, like a lot of our guys aren't having good breaks. So maybe as a staff, we need to start doing a little bit more like rate of force development for eccentrics, or a little bit more eccentric training, or, like drop jumps, or not drop jumps, sorry, like depth drops. Altitude landings, kind of just being able to control weight, like a drop squat too, also. But yeah, so that's something that I'm specifically interested in. And then a loose correlation would be cool if I could find, if we do figure out, maybe it takes us, so we generally do 3 CMJs for our jump test with a break between it. They're non-consecutive, but let's say we'll test a guy every 7 to 10 days. So we test a guy 4 times. So maybe in 12 jumps, this is like all theory right now. Maybe we can bucket him into, hey, he's a unimodal early peak. So he's a really good breaker. He's a good jumper. He's efficient, but we could work on maybe a little bit more propulsive mechanics. So maybe we do like some overcoming ISOs, some ballistic ISOs, some concentric based stuff, just maybe like peppered into his program because he's already an efficient jumper. Is there a
Yeah.
way that we could change him to like a late peak unimodal or get him to be more propulsive? And so now we're having their jump strategies, if we can bucket them, influence their training, right?
Which
So
is really
that
interesting because like there's so much talk about that, and I know I kind of asked you that earlier too. Is like how much, because it's like how much are okay. So we're collecting data, we're looking at data, and I see myself and other people like, okay, cool. So we're looking at this. We're looking at RSI and jump height, and then breaking RF or eccentric RFD, and we're looking at time to peak power or time to take off, and then peak power. It's like, okay, cool. Like we're monitoring this, but then it's also like, well, how much of that is influencing what I'm doing? Am I actually making changes, whether if it's for 3 guys, whether if it's for 6 guys, whether if it's for 1 guy, and I always find that to be interesting because I know a lot of people like talk about it, and I don't mean to say that they're lying because I don't think that's true at all, but it's also like realistically how much of that, and is it just a small adaptation or a small change that could be like, hey, instead of you doing consecutive jumps, I want you to do make them non-consecutive and then reset and then drive again, right? Because maybe we need more peak power, whatever the case may be, right? We need to develop more force, whatever. So it could be the smallest changes too, but it doesn't need to be like large, like scrap the whole program. You're doing so, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
it's interesting thought processes from that standpoint,
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, I think the main thing is trying to do one thing at a time, right? Like
Yes.
there's so much data that's out there, but you can't like your program's not going to fix everything. Like you are
Right.
naive, or I mean, I'm sorry, like you're just flat out dumb if you think that you are going to be able to change like every single metric or improve every single metric, which is why like something that I've learned, right? Because like coming out of college, when you're going into your first internship or you're a GA, you're like, I am literally the god of programming. I know periodization. And I'm going to make these people superhuman. Like I'm going to decrease their body fat. They're going to grow 6 inches and they're going to, like you think, right? Like you think you can do everything. Whereas now it's like, all right, let's look at one thing, right? That we could maybe make a change in, which is why jump strategies is something that I picked. It was influenced by the book Takeoff, but hey, maybe this is actually like one thing that I can look at. I'm literally just looking at the shape of how they get down and out of a CMJ. I'm not even looking at the landing portion of the CMJ, right?
Yeah.
Like we have metrics on that and we can definitely use them.
Yeah.
And for me, that's more of an auto regulation standpoint and monitoring and maintenance standpoint. But like maybe again, like you want to improve, like everybody on our team is having issues for time to take off, right?
Sure.
So maybe we just want to shorten the impulse of the CMJ. Okay, so like let's take that and work on it. So maybe we do a lot of like ballistic isos, a lot of concentric stuff, like bottom squats or like getting out of amortization phase or like just things like that. And then is our training making an actionable difference in this athlete, right? Or like the team's time to take off. So again, like there's a lot of useful data, what's static and what's just noise, but also you have to kind of get hyper focused on one thing, but also like not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like there are still good metrics that you can use in there, even if you're not changing them, like they still give you valuable information, but maybe you're using it again for more of a maintenance monitoring standpoint, more of a return to play standpoint, more of a, like, are they just hitting this benchmark metric that us as a staff and an organization believe is useful and valid for our team as a standard, right?
Yeah. Or like also from like a recovery standpoint too. I think that's one thing that everybody, I don't want to say forgets about, but like, fatigue masks fitness, right? And so like a lot of times they're like, oh, they're playing slow or they look tired. And so it's like, okay, well, is it that? Maybe yes. Or is it like they just aren't recovered from whatever it may have been? And that could be the week, that could be the day, that could be a travel, like we talked about. That's a huge stressor. That could be all these other things. And so it's just like, as much as I agree with you, which I do, it's also like, hey, like, especially in season, like we're monitoring this as a potential readiness factor, and we just don't want to see him dip below this percentage because of it could potentially lead to injury, right? But also, like, are they recovering? Like, is their lifestyle also conducive to performance? Which maybe at the college level it's not. Maybe at the NBA level it's not, because like, how many guys are taking care of their body? How many guys are, dialed in on nutrition consistently, not just on the road, not just when the team gives you dinners, but like consistently are you dialed in, and that's a struggle for a lot of guys, let's be honest, right? And so, there's a lot of other things too. And it's just like, I think, I'm curious, I'm going to throw this thought out here because I just had it as you were talking, but like, if we talk about a long-term athletic development model, yes, we're talking, potential hypertrophy and max strength and all sort of stuff, but like, well, can we take that same concept and apply it to the force deck stuff? So maybe 1 year we're working on, time to take off. And it's not that the next 3 years we're not going to, or maybe the first year we're looking at, peak power, right? And saying, how can we get this number up to be the highest that it possibly can be while still doing all this other stuff, but our main focus is peak power. And then next year it's going to be, time to take off, and then eccentric rate of force development, whatever the case may be, right? It's like, can you then apply the LTAD model to that, hopefully with the thought process of you have guys for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, which in the college world you may or may not, in the NBA you may or may not, right? And so it's like, can you then do that all at the same time, right? How do you apply all of that, but you focus on one thing with the thought process of, here's your 3-year developmental plan going forward with us, and so this is what we want to kind of focus on. I don't know. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that would be super interesting. Like, just hearing you say that again, like applying like LTAD to like college, it's like, oh, okay, so maybe if being able to produce force is our baseline for a lot of this stuff, whether it's concentrically or eccentrically, like
Sure.
maybe we're looking at peak vertical force in an IMTP, right? So our first year, we just want you to be able to get strong and sustain it for 5-10 seconds, however long we deem valid. Okay, now that you have this basis of force production, let's see how much power you can produce with it. Like, let's see what your impulse is looking like in year 2. Let's see if we can improve your peak power on your CMJ, right? So we're switching tests, but we're still utilizing force decks to analyze this information. Right. Now, from year 2 to year 3, okay, so your peak power is good. Let's see how quickly you can produce this power. Right. And like, now we're looking at time to take off. And if we shorten our impulse, then we can increase our power just by doing something like that, right? Because now time is a factor in like our acceleration and stuff. Right. Okay, now we're really good. We know how to produce force. We know how to produce power. Now we can produce this quicker. How quickly can we turn on the brakes when we land, right? Like, can we produce this power when we're landing? So something as simple as that of like, okay, now over 4 years, we're looking at one thing each year. But if you look at it comprehensively, like, that's a great battery of tests to use for any jumping athletes. If you're using the CMJ, like, it could be a volleyball athlete or it could be a basketball athlete. I mean, if you're thinking volleyball, that's almost even better for them because they have to jump so much more frequently than basketball players, right? So like, let's see how quickly you can get up, but then put the brakes on if you need to get back up.
Yeah.
Right?
How can you repeat this, 5 times in a row, right? Because let's say that's the max amount of times you're going to block a shot or whatever in volleyball. And maybe the same thing with basketball. Maybe because this, like, hey, you might go up for a rebound, you get it, you might take the shot, you miss it, you go up for the rebound again, you get it again, you go up for the shot, you might, you know what I'm saying? Like, you might get 4 jumps right away, in a 3-second play. It's like, well, how high can you continuously repeat, and how fast can you get off the ground and out jump the opponent, or at least get a shot off and potentially box out and do all this other stuff. Like, that would say, repeat peak power or repeated jump ability or, all this other stuff, right? And it's just like, then sustain it, right?
No, exactly. Or it's like, even like if you're looking at an approach, right? Like, everybody wants to poster somebody, but like, if we're looking at eccentric rate of force development, like, you're going from a little jump and you want to put those brakes on as quick as you can to get up as high as you can, right? So like, that's factoring in all those metrics into it. Or like somebody who's going up like for a kill in volleyball, right? Like, it's essentially an approach just like you are going in basketball, whether you're going right, left, right, off 2, off 1, like, you need to turn the brakes on first in order to turn that force into vertical force, like horizontal, vertical, and just get up as quick as you can.
Yeah. And then you're also looking at like, okay, well, hip internal rotation, how much is there, right? Because we know that's such a powerful position, and especially if you're going, right, left, right, or even off of two, you're getting into hip internal rotation in order to go up, right? Because if you're going to stop your force with that front block leg, that you're going into hip internal rotation to stop in order to go up, right? Like, and so it's like, is that a potential limiting factor, right? Maybe not.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's like something we do a lot. So basically, in season, our focus, we lift heavy on game days. Again, another Daniel Bove, I guess you could say he influences me a good amount. But we have quad 4 days, right? Like if we play a game, we will be lifting after it if it's at home. That's for sure. Just because we lose so much time to travel, especially in the G, because we fly commercial, and then I don't want these guys to be sore. So like day before games, usually quad 3 day, right? Like let's put lightweight on and move it fast, guys.
Move it fast, yeah, exactly.
After that, right? And you can get into a little bit more rotational type stuff because you're not loading them as much. I love using Kaisers and a little bit more fascial work with that. But then also, like, I really heavily emphasize mobility. And any day that we're going to have practice or whenever we travel, I have a mobility session. And when we travel right off the plane, it's usually like an FRC-based hip mobility session where we attack internal, external through pails and rails, passive range holds, active range lift-offs, hovers, and then we'll go into some light loaded as motion mobility where now we're trying to get in and out of our hip internal rotation or external rotation. We want to hit sagittal frontal transverse plane in order to kind of like check all the boxes, right? Or maybe we have practice and I have a different type of mobility session where it's just foam roll banded stretch for one group. And then group 2 is like a half kneeling kind of mobility where we have like a TheraPad out there. And then group 3, we might use our Vipers. So we get a little bit more fascial work. We can kind of do a little bit more loaded stuff, get a little bit more like locomotor type things in. And our guys have seemed to really like it. And one thing that we've prided ourselves on as a performance staff is like just time missed. We don't have a lot of guys missing games or missing practices. Like knock on wood, we haven't had any crazy injuries, but we generally don't have a lot of guys that are getting like groin strains, right? Or like hamstring strains or a lot of this stuff. And I think a lot of that is for like mobility and like the readiness factor, right? Like something that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I think it's how it should be done. You know what I'm saying? Because like we were talking about earlier, if you're flying commercial, and maybe you were able to group all the athletes together, maybe not. But like basketball guys are tall and typically is not the most comfortable on a commercial flight, right? And so, the size of the plane, the connections, all this other stuff play a factor. But like you were kind of sharing a little bit ago, and I even noticed like when I flew, whether it's like when I flew private with like even our football staff and stuff too, like you sit next to like a bigger guy and you're kind of like crammed, you're up over this, and it's like our linemen were like, hey, can we sit up front because there's there's more space for our legs to stretch out, and he's 6'7", he's 6'8", 350 pounds, like it's not conducive for performance for him to be crammed like this next to two other guys, and so it's just like, now it's commercial, and the general population doesn't really know or care about like, you're going to go play a game. You know what I'm saying? And so,
yeah, right. Like that. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I'm 5'11", and who is comfortable on a plane, but then you're talking about guys who are like, again, like 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". We've had 7-footers and they're sitting on like these 2x2 planes. And I actually had a player sit behind me on a plane. And I swear to God, he was like, you cannot move because my knees are jammed so far into the back of your seat that like any movement is hurting me. And I like had to sit there and like, even if I like did this, he's like, dude, stop. And I'm like, dude, I have to move. Like, I'm sorry, but like, I'm not comfortable either, but my back was killing me at the end because I couldn't like lean back on my right? But it's like, I mean, I'm only 5'11". This dude's 7 foot. Like,
if you're not
I can't even imagine. Like this guy, like his knees have to be killing him, his hips, right? Like they're just stuck in this position. And some of our flights are like 2-3 hours. So like the
Easy.
most important thing to me after that, it's not like, look, I don't care, like we don't need to go lift, but like let's just move, right?
Move.
And I encourage all of our guys, like mobility is optional. I say I highly encourage that you come. But if not, like just go for a walk. Like
Bingo.
just go, like just get some motion in and like do something. Because if you just go straight from this flight and go to your hotel room and whip out your PS5 or your Xbox One and hook that up and just start playing video games, you're gonna feel like crap tomorrow. Like I guarantee you are gonna be super stiff. You're gonna complain to me about it, and I'm gonna say, I offered this mobility session. It's literally 20 minutes. And everybody always is like, man, I'm really happy I did that after. And obviously over the course of a year, you can actually like get some appreciable change in their hip range of motion, right? Like if you get 20 to 30 of these FRC sessions in followed by like lightly loaded mobility, then these guys are like, hey, my hips are actually feeling way better. And it's like, oh, okay, well now I can get in and out of my cross better, right? Like I can stop on a dime better. It's actually changing my game. And I say, yeah, well, that's obviously my job, but that's something that I also try to individualize our mobility with. Like me, I'm a big basketball fan. So if a guy's having issues with me, I'll say, okay, like I watch you play, like I watch film on you. This is what I notice you can't do, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't go right to left through the legs. So you probably can't access that right hip internal rotation, right? Maybe it's because you have poor dorsiflexion in your right ankle. And so your knee's super mobile, and then now your hip is super stiff because of it. That's why you're always having right knee problems too. But like, again, it's like for the athlete, like this is why we're here. But that's also the fun aspect of our job is like you get a problem solve. And like, I would say you have to love the game in order to know necessarily what a certain player might need. But there's also like bigger things. Like a lot of basketball players have low back pain, right? Like they're just taller, they're lengthier, they hate loading because they feel like they have low back pain. Well, they also probably have shitty hip mobility because a lot of low back pain comes from poor hip internal rotation, right? And we all knew this growing up. Like you generally have a mobile joint and then a stable joint, and then so like if your hip is a mobile joint and it's not, guess where all that mobility is going to come from? Like,
crazy. And then compound that with like you have pretty weak glutes and like you can't access certain ranges of motion, which we think you should be able to access, right? Because your ankles are not very good because you're always in your ankle braces and they don't move freely. And then it's just like, well, now we're compounding from everything from the ground to the hip to the spine to everything else. And then you're like, oh, it's got to be all these weights I'm lifting. It's like, well,
yeah, exactly.
Maybe, but maybe not.
Right. And like one thing that I always encourage our guys to do is not wear their shoes in here. Like unless we're like throwing shit around or like we're going like super heavy, I'll say like just come in either barefoot or come in with your socks on. And obviously like that's somewhat of a liability on me because if a plate falls or some shit and they break their foot, like that looks really bad. But like these guys are going from basketball shoes most likely to like AF1s or like Jordans that they don't want to crease, so their gait looks like shit. So and they're just like they're like narrow toe box, like they're in these giant clunky shoes that their
just
feet never interact
against them.
Exactly. And like you wonder why all these guys have bunions or like their toes are off, like going off to the side, and they don't know how to like move their toes.
And they don't know how to feel right to like if it's the ground, and like they don't know how to like spread their toes out or feel what it should, or like properly put pressure on the ground. I'm like, should I feel this in my heel, the ball of the foot? Like I actually like took my shoe off today at practice, and like everybody's feet sweat, and so like I put my foot on the court and you can see the outline of your foot, right? And I'm just sitting there noticing, I'm like, okay, here's the ball of my foot, and then obviously you have where your arch is at, and then you have the heel, and I'm like, the ball of the foot is so much bigger, right, than everything else in the foot. Like there's so much more padding, there's so much more ability to put pressure through there. And so it's really interesting. I was just sitting there looking at it, and I was just observing my own foot, or at least the sweat mark of it, right? And I'm just like, how many guys actually understand this at the basic bare minimum, right? And you can get into, I think it's Gary Cook or Gray Cook, and like how he like goes into the foot and like the the in-depth on that. And it's just super interesting because I agree with you. Like, the foot's the only thing that interacts with the ground for the most part. But how much time do we spend just working our feet, whether it's just contact with the ground, whether it's actually grounding outside, whether it's, taking your shoes off, whether it's, some people are wearing the toe shoes, right? I'm not there, but it's just like really interesting to kind of see the differences amongst that, or at least how much pounding our feet take, all the time.
Yeah. And like for me, when it comes to that, like you have to have an individual session to do like foot work with somebody, right? Not footwork like agility ladder, but like actually work on their feet. So for me, it's like, what is the low hanging fruit here, right? Like what could we do easily? So what's something they probably don't get? Okay, let's just get out of our shoes. Like that's probably the easiest thing that we could do. And then like now you're doing, RDLs, you're doing split squats, you're doing different like bilateral or like different stance moves. And these guys are like rotational based moves. And it's like, hey, notice when you rotate over your foot, how that arch comes up. And when you rotate away from it, that arch collapses, right? Like now you're actually feeling your foot pronate and supinate. You can feel when you have to drive through your big toe for balance. You can feel like the tripod aspect of big toe, pinky toe, heel. And just like that and letting them understand like, oh, this is actually how I can balance, right? And like how I can actually like move with it, like doing a lunge, a series of walking lunges, body weight, even just with no shoes on. Like, they just feel different sensations. And so that's why for me, getting them out of their shoes in the weight room is so big. And it's not even like I'm doing anything. I'm not like, hey, everybody get a towel. We're doing towel grabs, right? Or like, no specific foot exercise. It's just being able to feel it, right? Like even trap bar deadlifting. It's like, hey, on this set, I want you to drive more through your heel. On that set, drive more through the ball of your foot. What musculature do you feel lighting up when you do the different? Now try to drive through the arch, like midfoot, right? And then it's just, oh, now we're actually like
bringing awareness.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like we're comprehending what it feels like to drive through different parts of our feet and when we need to, and also how it moves when we're having different types of like maybe rotation, frontal plane, locomotor type stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, that and like I think an undervalued component of going with no shoes is like the development of the Achilles and calf muscles too, because like when you sprint with shoes on, whether it's basketball shoes or training shoes, you're not feeling it in the calf and in the Achilles, right? Like, which is a good thing. Okay, cool. Like we don't want to hurt anybody by no means, but when you sprint without those on, it's a different, like you feel like the lower leg working so much more because it's, you're feeling every sensation. There's no space in between you and the ground, right? And like when you push off that big toe and you are, moving your foot, like you feel that, you notice it, right? And that's something that you have to work up to, obviously, because, right away, if you're going to have them sprint, like you might have some stuff come up, but like you got to work on it. But you just notice everything differently. It's a totally different sensation. It's a totally different, or doing pogos. Go do pogos without your shoes on. Totally different than doing pogos with your shoes on. Totally different, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting.
No, exactly. And again, like all you're doing is taking your shoes off. That's literally all you're doing. It's not a hard ask.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes dudes' feet smell, but it's worth it.
And honestly, I don't ever have any athletes be like, no, I don't want to take my shoes off. You know what I'm saying?
Usually they like it, right?
They love it. Yeah.
And it almost gives the idea of like it's a more laid back atmosphere.
Yeah.
Right? Like my shoes are off. So like we're not necessarily going to work, even if it's the exact same lift that you would have done with their shoes on. Like it's just different. Like it's like novelty to them almost, or it's like, oh, I usually kick my shoes off when I'm laying on the couch. So like that mindset kind of kicks in. Yeah. But you're still doing the same work, right? Like we're still trap bar deadlifting. Like, or even, hey, it's an upper body lift. Like just take your shoes off. Like,
just take your shoes off. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, for real though, right? But it's interesting when you, let's say you're doing a lunge, whether it's, I prefer a reverse lunge, but like, so when you do a reverse lunge and they step back, right? And now their big toe is on the ground and the heel is elevated. it's interesting because they notice, whether it's their plantar flexors, like they notice it and you can see it and you're like, yeah, you've never really separated your big toe like that before. Like I can tell.
Right.
Like, and they're like, they're feeling for the ground. You can see them actively feeling for it. You can see them actively, and it's a totally different, I don't want to say totally different movement, but they feel it differently because they're like, oh shit, like I don't have the entire sole of the shoe to put on the ground anymore.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like some guys will start to feel it and they want to do more, right? They're like, oh shit, like my feet are weak, or like this, they feel way better after. And like usually the one I go to after that, and it's super simple. Can you splay your toes?
Yeah.
Like it's really hard. Like I don't know if like I can't even really like splay all of my toes. Like it gets it goes weird. Like especially on my left foot. Like my right foot I'm pretty good, but like if people haven't tried to in a while, like try to just splay your toes. Like you could splay your fingers, and you'll be like, wow, I don't have any control over the toes on my feet.
Fact. 99% of the population.
Yeah, seriously. And like that was something that I learned from FRC too, because I remember taking the course and I was like, I don't even remember like the last time that I did that. And it's something that everybody has, right? But we're always in these like narrow toe box shoes. But like if you watch like baby videos, right? Like if you put your finger up to their feet, just like you do their hands, like they'll curl their toes around you, or they can like splay them away. And it's like, damn, like we really like screwed ourselves in that sense. And now with athletes or people who are in shoes all the time, they can't even do it at all. Cause like being barefoot, like, or, I used to live in San Diego, like walking on the beach barefoot, like you just hit different ground points of like contact
sensations.
Like toes will go a different way. Just walking through the grass barefoot, you'll hit a little bump, you'll hit a little, like toes will go up, go down, or like, they'll form around a rock. And it's such a great way to get that sense, like that sensation back to your feet. And again, like you said, it's the part of your body that's in contact with the ground most of the time. So you should probably be able to utilize all the sensory receptors in your feet, because there's a bunch.
Well, exactly, right. And it's funny because like, if you watch TV or you watch some of these like wilderness documentaries or whatever, right? It's like these people are walking in the woods randomly with no shoes on, and they're walking normally, and they're not like, when you first take your socks off too, and you're walking, let's say on a driveway, right? You're like hopping almost like on hot coals, because you're like, like, because you're just like, I haven't felt the sensations, and it almost hurts to an extent, right? Like I'll walk across the street to go to the mailbox or something, and you're like, this freaking hurts. Like, that should be an indicator, that should be an indicator. But then you see guys walking in the woods without shoes on, it's like, okay, so like, what are you doing? And it's typically that they just don't ever wear any shoes, those wilderness guys. But that should be an indicator for people, I try to wear Birks as much as possible. I'm a big Birks guy. If I'm not like, hell, I wear Birks on the floor coaching, like, or I go no shoes. But I try to stay away or out of as much as possible. I mean, obviously, like to an extent, we're professional, so we need to wear shoes and all that stuff, right? But like, just like today, I coached the entire session with no shoes on. Like, I'm like, heck yeah, I feel good. Like,
and then like just even getting into like your plantar fascia, like you don't like it doesn't get any stimulation. I mean, it does, but it gets the same stimulation essentially in your shoes. And then people wonder why they have like plantar fasciitis, but they're never outside of their shoes. And from what we know about fascia, right? Like it's a living, not breathing, but it's a living tissue, right? It adapts to the forces that are placed on it. So if you're walking around barefoot a lot more, your foot is splaying more, that fascia is getting spread out more. So it's not getting as tight and constricted, so that when you do push that one time and you feel a little tear, you're like, oh, damn, now I have plantar fasciitis. And like, you obviously don't, with fascia, you don't want to be too loose. You don't want to be too rigid, right? The idea of tensegrity, right? Like there's a good give and take to where you can also be elastic with it. And it's kind of the same thing with tendons, right? You're too stiff, it tears. You're too compliant, you can't transmit force through the tendon as well. And so I think that's a really underrated thing about just being barefoot is you are adapting your fascia to your gait cycle without the shoe. Or people who have like high, like orthotics, right? Like high
arch
heel
support,
or like high arch support orthotics. It's like, okay, well now your plantar fascia is just pressed up all the time, so that when you take them out and you actually do go barefoot and maybe you do have a flat foot, like that thing is not ready for it. So it might be good at times to wear it, but you also want to not wear it at the same time, right? It's like everything in moderation in a sense, unless you have some insane, like, you know, if you're born clubfoot or like there's like some predisposition to it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think the same thing goes for those listening, is not just like basketball athletes, but all athletes too. Like, especially you look at track and field, you look at football, where like they try to wear the most minimal, shoe possible, right? Which is great, but it's also like tends to be the tightest shoe. It tends to like have the most narrow midfoot to it, right? Whether that's good or bad or not, but like it tends to be that. It tends to be, how can I get, the least amount for what I have to do, but it's also like pretty constricted, pretty restricted, pretty much like, and then you tape your ankles, and then you tape your shoes on top of your ankle, or you tape your ankles on top of your shoes and all sorts of stuff too. And so it's like, man, like we're just really potentially limiting a lot of things from that standpoint. So it's all athletes. It's not just, it's not just basketball players or just volleyball. Volleyball for sure too. Like the shoes that they wear for volleyball are very tight, when you look at the shoes across the board. I feel like baseball might be really the only ones that fit regularly, if that makes sense, where they're not like super tight on them. I think track might be one of the worst, where it's just like, how do you even get your foot into that thing?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, for real though. But Alex, anything you want to wrap up with or have the last word on?
No, I mean, not really. I just really appreciate you having me on. I always love talking shop.
Yeah.
I know it's been a minute that we've been on here, but I mean, I thoroughly enjoy it. If anybody wants to reach out to me or anything, my big thing in this industry is pay it forward, because people always want to be where you are, or somebody does. Not that everybody does, but don't hesitate to reach out to me on like LinkedIn or social media, on IG, and I try to do my best to talk to people about how to break into the industry, any people that I know in their area, or just trying to connect and network with people, because I think that like our industry needs a little bit more of that.
Agreed. Where can people find you online?
On Instagram, I'm translational_training, and that's about it. I don't have Twitter or like anything else like that. And I just made my IG during COVID because I was bored.
You have good stuff out there though, for real. Like, guys, if you're not following him, honestly, like that's how we connected. I think I saw a post. I'm like, hey, this guy posts really good stuff. Like, and then we just kind of started talking after that, and just kind of have continued to chat, which I think is awesome. And so, seriously, go follow him on Instagram. I like the stuff that he puts out, because I think it's really good. And we didn't even get into a lot of it, with programming or with a bunch of other stuff that you have out there, that I'm like, hey, this is good stuff. This is where our thought processes should be at, right? I think it's great to get strong and all that, and that's cool, right? But there's, after a certain level of that, hey, and getting people strong is, I don't want to say easy, but is the easier part, right? Progressive overload and consistency tend to work pretty well with that standpoint.
Agreed. Yeah. And I mean, my whole goal with that was like, I was just trying to learn during COVID, right? There wasn't really much to do. And so basically anything you see me post about is probably what I'm learning about at the time, because I truly think the greatest way to learn something is to try to teach it to somebody else. So I try to just basically, like, if I'm reading a book, I'll post about it. If I read a research article, I'll make a series about it. Or if I'm looking at different types of stuff. So if you find something interesting, again, like, feel free to just send me the posts and ask a question on it. Or if you see that I'm posting a series on something and you want the information behind it, like, I will give anybody any access to information that I have access to.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Well, I want to let you know, maybe we don't hear it enough in this industry, but I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you and where you are at and what you are doing with the in-depth stuff that you're looking at and everything from that standpoint. I know we probably don't hear it enough, but I just want to let you know I think you're doing a great job, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. And I hope your athletes are too, and I hope your staff are too. But keep up what you're doing, because I think it's really good stuff. And I appreciate you and your time and the conversation today. And I know we're going to continue to have more down the road and everything as well. But I just want to let you know that.
Yeah, man, you as well. Thanks, just for connecting us all, right? Like listening to the different podcasts and getting to know these different strength coaches. Because you can listen to a podcast and you feel like you know them to a certain degree, right? Like it's almost like you're the one interviewing them. So keep it up. Like people do thoroughly enjoy listening to these, and not only that, but you learn.
I think that's the biggest thing, man. I mean, honestly, like it's great to connect with people. Love that aspect of it. I've been connected to people that I would have never thought that I would have been connected to before. But it's also like the learning component to it, not only for myself, but for everybody that listens. And hopefully I can impart some wisdom on everybody as well and bring value to the guests and everything from that standpoint. But it's just like, man, you learn so much because it's like, hey, like, what are you guys doing? Or what am I missing? Or, a simple question is like, what is the NBA looking at that the college is missing, right? Like, how can we help bridge that gap? Like, if we're looking at developmental stuff for guys, like, is it strength? Is it, body composition? Is it, what is the player development coach looking for that could potentially turn him on to a guy or turn him off to a guy? Like, that's a huge gap that it's like, if I don't know what the next level is looking at, how do I, I can identify the missing things that I think we need, but is that what's going to be needed at the next level? Maybe not,
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I know they're looking at changing stuff at the combine in terms of like, doing force plates now for the standing vert and just stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, just continuing to move the needle and just push the industry forward in terms of connecting to each other and really like, again, we're here for the athletes.
Right. Exactly. So guys, look at if you found this to be helpful, educational, if you were entertained with us as well, if you're like, hey, you know what, that's a great thought process, do us a huge favor, share the show. It's the only way the show grows. Okay. For those of you that are sharing it, thank you very much for doing that, but share every episode. Okay. I appreciate that. And then leave us a review, and the full length episodes are on YouTube. So go head over there, hit the subscribe button, and go from there. So guys, Alex, thank you. Appreciate you. And we'll catch y'all on the next one.
Thank you, man.